right. I think it did it.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is a little panel that we put together for our big free thought blogs fundraiser. We're trying to raise a little money to get past some legal debts and all that kind of stuff. So we're having a weekend event where we just, with no pressure, we sit around and talk about the things we care about. And one of the things everyone on Free Thought Blogs cares about is social justice. It's actually the central principle of the whole network. So that seemed a good thing to talk about. And then it turns out that we're all nerds. And a few of us are science nerds. So we love the science fiction too. And so we're going to get together and we're going to talk about this sort of thing. So kind of the focus today is, social justice and science fiction, because there's many ways to construct a story, and there's all kinds of science fiction out there that's all about, for instance, revenge. Revenge is not a very social justice-y sort of thing, okay? But, punitive justice instead of social justice. And what we want to do is talk about those aspects of the literature and the movies and the television that we watch that takes a different approach, which is to discuss how we can make the world a better place, where themes are stuff like voyages of discovery and personal growth and people fighting for other people instead of just ourselves. This is not a libertarian group. So we've got all these things that we can tie together, and we think those are the really interesting stories that are out there. So what we're going to do right now is we've brought on a distinguished panel of people, and I'm just going to shut up for a little while and turn it over to them. So who would like to go first and talk about this subject?
Edie?
In speech class, you never volunteer to go first. But I'll go first if nobody else wants to.
Yes, okay. I volunteer Steve to go first.
So, hi everybody. So, for anybody who doesn't know me, who's watching, my name is Steve Shives, and I have a YouTube channel where I used to talk a lot about atheism and skepticism, and I still do from time to time. But I also always used to talk about politics and social justice and things like that. And a few years ago, I started to do a lot more videos, not just about science fiction in general, but specifically about Star Trek, because that's the only kind of science fiction I really know a lot about. I'm a very narrowly focused sci-fi nerd. I know everything about Star Trek, and everybody's like, "Oh, have you read, famous sci-fi book series?" No, I haven't. I probably should, but I don't. I haven't. But yeah, and Star Trek is a really good subject to dive into and to analyze and to examine if you are interested in social justice, because it's one of the major sort of entertainment properties that has a concern for social justice baked into it. From the very beginning, it was part of the architecture of Star Trek from the moment it was created by its original creator, Gene Roddenberry, that it would be used as a vehicle to tell stories meant to inspire people to support equality, to support justice. It was the original series was produced in the late 60s, in the middle of the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War and protests in the streets and political turmoil. And it was very much an attempt to say, we're going to tell fun sci-fi adventure stories that people can watch and enjoy, but we're also going to give them a message. And the message is that our society has certain problems, and those problems often deal with the way we treat each other due to our race or our ethnic background or our religion or our gender, or the way we treat other countries the way our country, carries itself in regard to other countries, things like that, that we should be aware of and we should want to fix and we should want to change. And so it's one of the more sort of fascinating and irritating questions that I often get in my work is when people will say, like, not really a question, more of a complaint, when people will say, like, well, I just don't understand why you have to make it so political when you talk about Star Trek. And to me, that misses one of the fundamental points of the whole thing, which is I mean, not every single Star Trek story is political. Some of them are just sci-fi adventure, stories. But inherently, the overall enterprise, no pun intended, is extremely political. So yeah, I talk about Star Trek. I talk about politics. I try to talk about them both at once as often as possible because I know that really annoys people. Uh, and I will hand it off to someone else now because I think I have babbled enough for a prologue here.
Okay, why don't we move on to Terry then? Tell us about yourself and your blog and all that kind of good stuff.
You were okay. I'm a TD Walker, but nobody calls me TD. So I'm Tammy. Hi.
Tammy, yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's never in print, so it's only people I email who
my brain
know
thinks
the
TD.
secret behind my name. I am primarily a science fiction poet, which, how many of you knew there was science fiction poetry out there? We have a whole society and an award and everything, book award, poem award. Anyway, I do write some fiction though. And, but what I'd like to talk about is the fact that we think of science fiction poetry in terms of short pieces that, I'll step back and say in poetry, it's just like flash fiction or shorts. You can't, because of the time and space that you have, create a whole economical system, create a whole different social system, just because of the time and space that you have for the poem. That's usually less than a page. So what the poetry that I really enjoy reading that is concerned with social justice does, instead of necessarily looking for an answer to a particular question, it opens up the questions that the poets are asking to new questions that we can ask. So rather than asking a question to guide the reader to a particular answer, they ask the question so that you can then further find additional questions or find tangential questions, whatever it is that the poem is attempting to do. And you'll find science fiction poetry that does a lot of the space opera sort of fun adventure things, but there are lots of folks out there who are writing poetry that is very socially aware. And I've had the pleasure of interviewing several poets lately over some at the blog at Free Thinking Ahead. That's the name of the blog, which I should have mentioned, sorry. Some of which I've interviewed over at Free Thinking Ahead, but elsewhere on the web too. And I try to link back to those if they are of interest. Just a few poets whose work that I really enjoy. Janine Hall Gailey, she wrote The Robot Scientist Otter. She's very concerned with environmental justice. We've got lots and lots of feminist poetry. This is one of my favorite anthologies. It was edited by R.B. Limberg, also a famous fiction writer as well, put out by Aqueduct Press, which there's a whole press full of socially aware poetry and fiction and nonfiction. And another one of my favorite books, Unmanned by Jessica Ray Bergamino, in the voices of the two Voyagers probes, but it's also a deep examination of women's bodies and how they are viewed. So that's where I am with social justice and poetry.
Very good. Okay, Joe, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe. I have the Serious Mind YouTube channel. I haven't made much in the way of videos in the last few years. So occasionally I'll rip one off, and I've done collaboration videos. Steve used to have a Breakfast Club channel, and now Got That Funk has another one. I've done videos on that. And even from the beginning, I started out doing atheist videos, but even at the time, there was still a political bend to it. This is why I really got interested in the atheist movement, because it was all about trying to change things and take the grip of religion and all the harm that that can do on society, and try to address those in a lot of different ways. But as far as science fiction goes, I mean, I've always been a major science fiction person. It's no surprise that I turned out to be an engineer. But right from the beginning, at age 8, seeing Star Wars in the theater, I've literally seen Star Wars over 100 times. I stopped counting it 100 times, and I've seen, even the ones that even the episodes that I haven't liked, I still watch them several times. And been Star Wars, Star Trek. Babylon 5 is my favorite, for a lot of reasons, and but most science fiction, Battlestar Galactica, at least the original one anyway. But to go to Steve's point real quick, I always found it funny too when people complain about politics in their fiction, because, and especially I ask them why. Well, why are you so upset about it? And they'll say, well, it's in my face. They think that it's not subtle enough. And I said, well, if you think that this is a new development of politics in your science fiction, then obviously the subtle way it was done before wasn't working. You missed the trick. So they had to kind of amp it up and get it a little bit more direct. And I really wonder, if they could see, like I said, the original Star Trek series, Next Gen, and any of the offshoots, and weren't getting the politics then. And sometimes they kind of beat you over the head, and then they still missed it. Well, then we have to make it more direct. But even in Star Wars, the idea that it was the rebels against the Empire, so it was against imperialism, it was against government taking people's rights away, and it was supporting the downtrodden, and that was the thing about the Empire, was not diverse, but the people, the rebels were, and so this has always been a message, and it may have been a bit more subtle. But hell, even Princess Leia, the fact that she is a princess, but she's not the damsel in distress. She's quite capable individual. So even there, they were addressing issues of women's rights. So yeah, I think that now in more recent years, I've done a lot more related to race. The last 12 years, really, racial issues have come to the fore, and so a lot of my videos have focused on that. Being a Black man in America, biracial, multiracial, however you want to look at it. Kind of hits home for me. So, and that's also been an issue in science. And sometimes science fiction will take a more subtle approach and have it be alien, but it's still addressing racial issues.
Very good. Okay, so I guess it's my turn.
Abe's here.
Abe's here. Where is Abe? He's invisible.
Yeah, sorry.
There you are. Okay, yeah, let's let you go next.
I still don't have a camera working. So I exist only as a disembodied voice.
Well, that's cool. Okay.
Well, I won't go on for too long. But for those who don't know, I run a blog largely focused on climate change and on developing a society that can maintain a modern technological standard of living of some sort that is also functional within climate change and continues to increase democracy and social justice for everyone. I guess in terms of science fiction, I've lately been working most on a series of stories surrounding life in New York City in a couple thousand years, with a sea level rise of about 150 feet above where it is right now. And New York City is a kind of artificial archipelago, mostly Manhattan and outlying areas, but I mostly focused on Manhattan with roughly the same street plan as it has now by some miracle of engineering, except that it's all canals. And I've been reading science fiction since before I can remember, I think. I don't really remember. But I since you can't see, I'm a straight white guy and not just a shapeless void. But I started becoming aware of the use of science fiction and fantasy to kind of push boundaries and introduce new ideas and whatnot. I don't know, sometime growing up, but then I would say in college, people started sort of clearly pointing it out, which is, as we discussed earlier, sometimes a subtle approach doesn't always work with folks who are have society designed around them. And I did get to the point where the kind of stuff that that gets complained about by the anti-social justice crowd is just boring. It reflects a kind of mundane version of life far too much for me, and so I'm much more interested these days in use of science fiction to explore new topics, to broach new subjects, to imagine a better world without trying to, construct a sort of, I don't know, Mary Sue version of a society, I guess you could say. And so it's a fun challenge for me, and I very much adhere to Ursula Le Guin's view that it's not my place to tell the stories of people who aren't like me in this world, in this society. So if I want to have something other than just sort of another white male kind of boring, samey science fiction story, then that needs to be in a different society where I'm not trying to represent experiences that aren't mine to, stories that aren't mine to tell. And so in that regard, science fiction and fantasy feel like a sort of better sandbox to play in, so to speak. I guess that'll do me for now.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so everybody, I'm posting links to the blogs I know and in the chat. So if you want to find out more about Abe and Tammy, you can get to them, and I presume you can find Joe and Steve somewhere on the internet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a presence on some website or another.
Yeah. I think a few people may have heard of you.
I guess.
Anyway, yeah. So let's see, where do I want to go with this? Because there's a lot of things I could talk about my history with science fiction as well. I'm not a creator, so I'm not writing science fiction or writing poetry or anything like that. I got my introduction to science fiction when I was probably about 8 years old and stuck home sick, and my dad brought me some book, some anthology, I think it was, and I thought this was pretty neat and just started getting into it. And then because I was a nerd, I would devour a couple of books a day. So I chewed through a lot of stuff very fast. But what was really big for me was the transition that hit me was early on. You read all this stuff like by Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke and Heinlein and so forth. And sure, it's fine, it's classic. And for a young science nerd, it really addressed my interest there. But where I really got into science fiction was when the new wave came along. And okay, Joe, it sounds like you remember it. But maybe the rest of you are a little too young for this. But yeah, in the 60s and 70s, and there was this revolution in science fiction where they started telling stories about people. Sure, we've got this exotic science fiction world, and we got all these fantastic gadgets, and we got rocket ships flying everywhere, but the conflicts and the personal growth was all people just interacting. And I found that so much more compelling. And as somebody who went into a career in science, it kind of shaped me as well too, because yeah, I'm one of those hardcore science people with a science job and doing science teaching and all this kind of stuff. But I made a decision 20 years ago to switch to a liberal arts university where I'm at now, because that breadth is what matters to me. That being able to talk about ideas that are more than mechanistic, here's how you get from point A to point B, and actually talking about the effects of these ideas on human beings. That's what I think matters. Or the effects of these ideas on spiders. That's also good. But anyway, we've got a lot of different ways we can approach this, and that's where I've been coming from. So sometimes I get turned off by things like some episodes of Star Trek. The ones with, oh, we're going to change the phase polarity and crawl through a Jeffrey's tube and push this button and the problem goes away. I hate those. So I have this love-hate relationship with Star Trek.
There are a few of those.
There are a few of
Oh, yeah.
those.
I
But
have to say, well,
go ahead.
I mean, it's one of those things. Like I find this really interesting because I know, I know that you just said that stuff like that bothers you, PZ, and I know that it bothers Joe sometimes too. And I just never like that. I mean, the over reliance on techno babble in some episodes is annoying to me because I just don't think it has dramatic weight. It's just like people doing, they're just saying made up words and then they're like, that fixed it. But I just don't think it doesn't have dramatic weight. But in terms of the science, and I fancy myself a little bit of a science nerd too. I think the fact that I was so into the human space flight when I was a kid is one of the things that drew me to Star Trek, because I loved, learning about, like, I'm 40, so I missed the moon landings, but I as soon as I learned about them as a kid, I was like, are you kidding me? People walked on the moon? What? Are you serious? It was just the most wondrous thing to me. And I loved learning about that. And I loved watching space shuttle launches and learning all about the history of human space flight when I was a kid. And then when I got into Star Trek, I was like, oh, they're astronauts. And that was sort of one of my ways into that, of thinking like, oh, they're astronauts, cool. But even with that being the case, like, it never has bothered me when Star Trek does things that are completely unscientific. Like that, just I guess because I don't have an actual hard science background, because I am not a trained scientist. I am a trained English student, which means I have no useful skills.
Hey, don't knock that.
I know.
One of my sons was an English major. So yeah,
it's some of that trademark English major self-deprecation for you. We know we're useless, but no, it's but yeah, so it never bothers me that things happen in Star Trek that are completely unscientific. Just for that sake, because, like, honestly, a lot of what happens in it has, like, it's not hard sci-fi. Maybe a few isolated episodes here and there might qualify as hard sci-fi or dealing with like hard sci-fi concepts, but overall, like, it's not hard sci-fi at all. So that's another thing that always makes me laugh when people complain about, oh, the scientific premise of that episode was ridiculous. Like, well, I mean, like, wrong show, man. Like, wrong show. But I do love, but that's, because one of the things that draws me to it is not so much the science, but the fact that it does have a social conscience, the fact that, and there are episodes of Star Trek, like some of the episodes of Star Trek that I know annoy other people, are some of the ones, even people who appreciate the political side of it like I do, are some of the episodes that are just super heavy-handed about the political message. Like one of the most notorious ones from the classic Trek series is Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, which is the one where it's about two aliens, and they are both divided right down the center, and they are half black and half white in terms of their skin tone. And it's this really obvious, like, heavy-handed racism allegory. And I mean, and it's like, I acknowledge that it's not a great episode in terms of a piece of dramatic writing, but I love it so much because I love when a show that has a platform and they know that people are watching and they know they have people's attention, they're at least trying to tell you something worth telling you, even if they fail as drama, they're trying to make an important point. And I love that. And I really wish that more shows and media productions that know they have a lot of eyeballs on them would do that.
Well, and even in that episode,
go ahead.
I was going to, even in that episode, I mean, it's heavy-handed, but again, looking at the time, when you put it in the historical context of what was going on around it, it's basically saying, like, because it should be obvious that humans are all, one, biological family, but it took that lack of subtlety to kind of hammer it home, and in a way where the differences between the two were not clear to the crew of the Enterprise. That, well, you're both half black and half white, and then they, of course, well, yeah, he's half black, he's black on the left, and I'm black on the right. So it's a trivial difference, but was kind of the point. All the differences we have, and that we recognize, while we can put some importance around our own identity, but in the end of at the end of it all, they're trivial differences, and they shouldn't separate us, and they certainly shouldn't have us at one another's throats.
It was also the late 60s when you needed to get hit in the head with a sledgehammer to get the point about race and racism. It does mean, though, that I think, when I saw it when it was first aired, because I watched every Star Trek when it first came on, and I remember it fondly, but as time goes by, it does become way too clumsy and heavy-handed in our memory, and that's a good sign. Although you could argue that today we need some more of those heavy-handed sledgehammers, but yeah, at the time it was pretty potent stuff. Just
the as far as the on the plus side, you look at an episode like in Next Gen, like Measure of a Man, which to me is one of my all-time favorites. That's the one where the Federation wants to dismantle Data, and basically make copies of them. And Picard defends his rights and says, "Hey, this is a thinking sentient being. You don't have the right to dismantle it just because it would be useful." And they have the whole court case, and it talks about what makes someone sentient. What is sentience? What is sapience? And is it right to effectively create a race of slaves of thinking beings? And obviously we know the answer to that, but not everybody does.
Yeah. So Tammy, you want to throw anything in here? Or Abe? Oh, you have to unmute yourself.
I actually got an interesting, y'all are talking about subtlety. I actually got an interesting piece of writing advice from someone one time, and it was basically, however subtle you're trying to make it, it's too subtle. in other words, so just from a creator's point of view, we might be aiming for subtlety, but we kind of have to grapple with the fact that the entirety of the audience maybe will miss something if we make things too subtle. If we want to, if we want to make things a little bit more complex and layered, things will get missed. So I think even now we are at risk of making things too subtle. So.
Oh, I think that's obvious. Yeah.
So it makes me curious about what is written now that we think is complex and subtle, that will be seen later on as, well, that was so heavy-handed.
Yeah, but conversely,
came out of the 2020s.
Yeah, but the other side of that coin is, look at the stuff in the 2010s and look at where we ended up. Apparently, nothing was blatant enough in the last few years, and so that's the measure of subtlety we have to apply. Is what was really good 10 years ago before Trump,
right? And
why didn't it change the world in a good way? I don't know.
Something fairly recent that comes to my mind, and full disclosure, I haven't actually seen this movie all the way through in any meaningful sense, but one of the new Star Wars movies has a long segment where a bunch of people go off to, I think it's Canto Bites Casino. And a lot of people didn't like that so much. And one of the reviews I saw went into the fact that the original Star Wars series, for all it delves into the kind of life at the pointy end of fascism in space, It doesn't really delve into why anybody would support such a system, because you only see it from the point of view of the rebels and the people in scrappy little desert outposts. And so Canto Bites gave people a view of the upper class and the middle class who aren't involved in, the brutal work of maintaining the empire and expanding it, or in the being the target of that hammer, so to speak. And I don't it may not be that it was the best done thing, but it seems pretty clear that a lot of people really missed that for pretty much every system that has ever existed for governing humans, or for humans governing themselves, since I prefer the a slightly more anarchist take to that, a majority of people do just fine. Maybe not a majority, but there's like a sizable portion of people who their life's good enough. It's, for some people it's not great. And then for some people it's fabulous. And that is the case for fascism. That is the case for the worst versions of communism and socialism, even in capitalist propaganda about them. You still, like, everybody admits that, like, oh, well, the ruling party does fine. And so I think that's something that is pretty recent, stands out pretty well when someone points it out, but I think a lot of people just missed it. And I hope people will notice it in the future. But
yeah, I kind of felt the same way because, I didn't think it was a great movie. It was an okay movie, but that scene didn't bother me because I've always felt that one of the things that people seem to just glide over in Star Wars movies is, even from the very first one, in chronological order as presented, it's pretty clear that life is miserable for a lot of people. They have slaves. They have people on vapor farms or whatever, just doing this horrible mundane work, and they're clearly not rich, and yet that just slides by like, oh well, this is a good, it's a world with serfs on it. That sounds great. Yeah, we should encourage that sort of thing. And so something like that Canto Bite scene was something that just said, there's costs to this stuff, and there are people who are exploiting other people, and we didn't need to be this poor. We don't need slaves.
yeah, I just want to throw in one of the things that I ran into in dealing with my my Deep Future space station storyline, different thing was, any kind of civilization that has that technological capacity, you need to do some work to have scarcity as a plot point. And I get that, like, for some people that, scarcity is something we can all relate to, because everybody's been, well, most people have been hungry at some point in time. But, like, you need to do a lot of work. If you can go from star to star, if you can leave a galaxy to get away from a regime that's ruling the whole galaxy, and you still have people who have to live as, like, just bandits in a desert wasteland, something is very wrong there. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, even with what we have right now, the only reason we can't just take plant matter and use it to make every kind of plastic or fuel that we make currently from fossil fuels is because it takes a lot of energy to do that. And we're talking about civilizations that have the energy to punch holes in space and travel faster than light, and, like, and you need to moisture farm. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, to the subtlety issue, one great example I can think of is Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, because that movie was actually intentionally a parody and a commentary on the book, because it's clear to most people those that Heinlein kind of flirts with fascism, at least in some of his writing and in his politics. And so Verhoeven took that and kind of went to an extreme, intending to make it obvious that he's making fun of it. And a lot of people totally missed it, even though they had these over the top, very propaganda like commercials in the middle of the movie, and some people just didn't get the subtlety. So, you could hit somebody over the head with something that stark and they still don't get it.
Oh yeah, but the uniforms were gorgeous.
Yes, they were. Oh, I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies, actually. And I read the book. The book actually, I detest. It was the most dull book I've ever written. I actually stopped reading in the next to last chapter because I said I read this in almost this entire book and it never got exciting. So there was zero chance that the last chapter was going to get good. So
yeah, there are also some philosophically troubling things in there, like requiring service for citizenship.
Yep.
And yeah, that was a big point for him, and it just irritated the heck out of me. But
PG, one thing you said earlier about how things look today, and how some things might have looked great at the time and not so much today. I think that's a sign that the society has come a long way.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
This is one of the things that's really hard to get across to people, is that you can see improvements in society, but still find room to criticize. And just because you can show me this one little thing that got better, the Steven Pinker solution, doesn't mean I'm going to sit back quiescently and say, oh, well, then we can all just relax.
that comes up with racial issues all the time. It's like,
Yeah.
well, things aren't as bad as the '60s, so we're expected to be quiet about it. Like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Hey, what are you complaining about? Black people can vote now, right? We're done.
Usually.
Yeah.
On paper.
The civil rights movement.
Have
we had the
access to
civil rights
voting.
movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Stop complaining, everyone.
And if the police slaughter a black person in their sleep, they're going to charge him for potentially having wounded a white person with stray bullets.
Justice. You're describing justice, Joe. You're describing justice.
Yeah. That's what this panel is about, is justice.
Yeah. There's another aspect of how I really love when science fiction, and in my case particularly Star Trek, tries to send a message in terms of social justice, and that is when the message is directed not at, by the way, Commander Riker behind me, check it out. When the message is directed not at society as a whole, but at us as individuals, because I feel like that is one of the toughest walls to get through. It's one thing to write a story where the theme of the story is there's this huge societal problem and we need to change it. Right. That's something that, and that's important. And that's, I love when Star Trek does it. I love when the Twilight Zone does that. Some of the great activist episodes of the Twilight Zone were all about, racism and the madness of war and all kinds of, really important social issues. But there are also episodes of Star Trek where the point isn't there's a problem with society and we need to change it. But more specifically, there might be a problem in our own hearts or in our own minds. And we as individuals need to look inside ourselves, and maybe we need to change. And that is so important. And that, I think, is the source of a lot of resistance to social justice movements in the minds of a lot of people, where they get stuck on the fact that they feel like they're being accused of something that they don't think they did, or they feel like they're being judged for something that they don't think they're doing wrong, and they make it all about them and an accusation, and they get defensive. And I've done it too. Like, everybody does it. I'm saying they, but it's me too. Like when someone says, hey, you shouldn't have said that, or you shouldn't have done that, or that thing that you think maybe that maybe you should examine, that there are some not good attitudes underneath that. Like the reflexive response is to get defensive and to say, oh, that's not what I meant, or, oh, I didn't, you're taking it the wrong way, or you need to lighten up or whatever. And it's nice when there's an episode of Star Trek where the message is, maybe it's not just everything that needs to change. Maybe it's that we need to change. There's a really nice moment in one of the newer Star Trek series, the Picard series that came out recently. And there's an episode where Captain Picard, or retired Admiral Picard now, has to sort of realize that his attitude toward the Borg, who famously abducted him and assimilated him during Star Trek: The Next Generation, is leading him to act with prejudice toward other people like him who used to be Borg, who he has an innate distrust of, and he thinks, oh, once you're a Borg you can't be saved, and once you're a Borg you're just bad for good, and like the Borg, the Borg can't be redeemed, they have to be exterminated. Like he says a line very similar to that in the episode, and then by the end of the episode he meets people who used to be Borg and who were sort of deborgified and are trying to return to a normal life, and he realizes that he was wrong and that he shouldn't have thought that way and he shouldn't have said those things, and he needs to change his own attitude. And when a show or a story shows us that its protagonist is wrong about something and is willing to change, or is at least open to accepting that they need to change, that is a really, really powerful way of sending a message, and a social justice message that, is just as important, if not more important, than writing, the allegory about racism or the allegory about class inequality, which is all very, very important and very appreciated. But, we need to change ourselves. We need to be open about the fact that we are not perfect, that we have blind spots, that we have prejudices, whether we are aware of them or not. And if we want to fix the big problems, the big problems are going to keep happening if we don't work on ourselves too.
I do, if I may, I want to push back on that just a little bit, um, which is one of the things that I've noticed in talking about when people, I've spent a majority of the last decade talking to people about climate change in a variety of circumstances, both online and offline, in person, and so on. And one of the things that comes up a lot is I think that there's a degree to which, at least in American society, we've almost put too much emphasis on individual change as the method for societal change, which isn't to say that there's not a need for it. I don't disagree actually with anything you said there, really. But it we've internalized, I think, the notion that if there's a problem with society, that means there's a problem with us. And therefore, if you're criticizing my society, you're attacking me. And I know I'm a good person, and so on and so forth. And it's part of the problem is very similar to what you're saying, where it sort of shuts down consideration of what changes we need to have within ourselves. But I have found, at least in dealing with climate change and more recently in dealing with both capitalism and in arguments about that and socialism, anarchism, all that stuff. And recently my hobby on Twitter has been trying to make a leftist case for voting for Joe Biden. Is that it can be helpful sometimes to zoom out and focus on the system and the problems with the system, just because it allows people to see their place in the system. It allows people to see, like, in learning more about capitalism and so on. I just about a year ago, I was working at REI in Boston, and there was a young man who was a fellow cashier there who was an anarchist. And my response was, well, general idea is nice, but I don't think it would work. Probably more than a little condescending. I'd have to track him down and ask him. But part of the issue that I found is that my understanding, my values haven't changed so much as my understanding of the world on which I'm trying to practice my values has changed. And that has also then enabled me to find personal change through an understanding of the need for systemic change. And so having a better understanding of the system, like, for example, sorry, I know I'm going all over the place a little, but going back to climate change, the fact that such a small number of corporations control so much of the planet and are responsible for so much of global emissions and the pollution on the planet, where the focus on individual lifestyle changes, I'm all in favor of that. I try to live as frugally as I can in that regard, but that misses the point. And in understanding that problem better, it was also able to sort of see the world in terms of systems a little bit more and see how those systems intersect, including then coming back into racism and the role that has played in, not to sound class reductionist, but dividing the working class. And all these all of these prejudices that we have and that are sort of indoctrinated into us by the world that we live in, that sort of create the need for individual change, are I guess individual action is intersectional with systemic action. Maybe is the best way to put that.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's different than what Steve's talking about. He's just saying that typically a lot of the sci-fi talks about the systemic and doesn't talk about the individual. So it's not that he's saying that the individual part is more important. It's just that it's often not written about in sci-fi or in TV shows and so forth. So
fair enough.
And
I don't need you to fight my battles for me, Joe.
I like doing it.
Maybe you do.
Maybe I do. I don't disagree with anything you just said, Abe. I agree. I think you need to do both. You need to work on both levels, because obviously there's a lot of work at the systemic level that needs to be done desperately.
Right. Well, what I'm thinking of is like modern America. We have a problem with racism, but I think there's a difference between telling someone, "Oh, you're being racist right now," and explaining to people the importance of structural racism, that everyone's got incentives to be, well, the guys on top have incentives to continue to be racist, and we have to address that, because if we just sit back and wait for individuals to require some awareness of their privilege and all the things that are going on around them, it's never going to get fixed.
Right.
And also, like A was talking about, things like environmentalism. So much of the environmental movement in this country has been about devolving everything onto individual citizens. We're all supposed to recycle our cardboard. And does that really make that big a dent? Especially when you've got the corporations dumping tons of stuff and, clear cutting forests. And it needs both approaches.
Well, the other part of the problem too is that a lot of what's needed on an individual level costs a lot of money, and the average person just doesn't have the luxury of doing it. Like, okay, in the last 4 years, I put solar on the house, I replaced all my light bulbs, I upgraded, put new insulation and did a bunch of other things to the house to make it more energy efficient. I'm actually a slight net producer of electricity now. Was something that New Jersey doesn't actually let you do on purpose. So I actually had to purposely go a year with crappy electric bills just so that I could then do the solar and then do all the energy saving things, so I could become a net producer. But yeah, I have the ability to do that, but a lot of people don't. And I'm in a state where I can actually do the solar. I was able to do as a lease with no money out of pocket, but a lot of states that's not available. So I guess I promote it to people who can do it, but I also don't go around shaming people who can't, because I understand that the average person doesn't have the means to be able to do the things that I've done. which is, and like you said, the only way to really address it is to go big. Rebecca Watson actually did a good video about that, talking about how much of greenhouse emissions come from a very small number of companies.
Yes, I just got an incoming call from my granddaughter, so I had to pass it off. Most important thing is
Yes.
when she calls. Yes. Yeah. So I got distracted. Where are we going with all this? Oh, so I had another question stored away in my head that I wanted to bring out here in this panel, and that is, Star Trek is a classic example of post-scarcity science fiction, which, and a lot of utopian sorts of science fiction ideas are all about that. And is that worth even thinking about? Will we ever have a post-scarcity society? And wouldn't it be more interesting to deal with science fiction societies that are struggling with the reality of the world, like we are?
That's why I like Babylon 5.
Well, that's sort of my answer, because occasionally people, because I've made videos about this, and people will say, the thing that really annoys me about Star Trek and its sort of utopian vision of Earth is they never explain how we got there. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. If they had figured it out, hopefully they wouldn't be writing Star Trek episodes. They'd be trying to implement it in real life. Um, but yeah, and not just the post scarcity society, but I appreciate whenever Star Trek is willing to show us sort of the cracks in the facade of the perfect Earth society, which it does more frequently in the more recent shows than it did back, say, in the Next Gen era, where it was just sort of taken as read that Earth had solved all of its major problems and everything was cool there. And Starfleet and the Federation were above reproach. And in more recent shows and movies, that's a more recurring theme has been actually everything isn't perfect. I mean, it's a lot better than it is now, but people still have biases and prejudices. People still have unscrupulous motivations and ambitions that can cause them to betray their principles. And I agree with you. I think that's a lot more interesting and a lot easier to tell stories that are more relevant to today's moment. Because if you're going to do a sci-fi show and you want to present, say, an allegory for the United States, you can't present that as a perfect society. But a society that a lot of people think is perfect but actually isn't, that's pretty close. That's a good starting point.
So there's a relevant comment from the chat here. Dana Cole says, we're arguably in a post-scarcity society. The issue is
that's what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're on the same wavelength with Dana Cole. All right. So that's good.
Yep.
Yeah, I think a lot of the conflicts are generated by ourselves, and they shouldn't be there, but there they are.
To what Steve was saying, this kind of ties back to the Babylon 5 I was talking about. There's a lot of things that happen on that show, like where at one point, Earth gets overtaken by a fascist regime, was in cahoots with a basically fascist alien power, and the power that's on their side, that's nominally not fascist, but turns out to have some problems themselves. But there's one of my favorite episodes. There's an alien species that wants to potentially have an alliance with Earth, and they come and they're very haughty and they're very xenophobic, and so when they're walking around and they have this idea of superior races and inferior races, meaning species in their case, and so they're trying to show all the best parts of Babylon 5. Oh, see, we have all these technological advances and so forth. And then what actually convinces this species to want to sign a treaty with Earth is that they get taken into what's called down below, which is kind of the lesser used parts of the station. And there's basically the people who live there are squatters. A lot of people who came to Babylon 5 looking to have a new life, and it didn't work out. You know, they're still working. They're still living in a scarcity, pre-scarcity society, I guess it would be. And they still use currency, and particularly on Babylon 5 and other colony worlds where people have even less because it's hard to grow food and so forth. And so when he sees this underclass on the station, and the person on Babylon 5 who's taking them around is very embarrassed that they have poor people, they have starving people on the station. And this alien thinks this is the greatest thing and says, wow, you found a way to make use of your surplus population. You've got a way to ensure an underclass in the inferior species. They have no political power, and they can be used for cheap labor and so forth. And that's what makes this alien decide to sign the treaty. And of course, the Babylon 5 people are appalled that that's what stands out to this alien, and that this alien thinks this is a good thing. So that was a very I thought it was a very good episode because, kind of, there are people on Earth now that have that same attitude.
Yes, was this a
It's a
Republican
fabulous
species?
episode.
It was very Republican species, the Umati.
That episode also has, I think, one of the least sexualized and most entertaining quote sex scenes in it.
That is great.
Between species that don't necessarily understand how it works with the other species.
Yeah. See, the thing is, the character Ivanova, she uses this alien's ignorance against him, because to admit that he was ignorant would be a sign of being inferior. So his species, as part of when they sign treaties, is they have sex. The two parties have sex. And sure, she doesn't want to have sex with this guy. So she tricks him into thinking that human sex is this ridiculous ritual that has nothing sexual in it whatsoever. And of course, he's not going to admit that he's been fooled, because that would be to admit to being inferior. So she gets away with tricking him, and it's quite comical.
Yeah, you bring up something though. We've been going for almost an hour now, and we barely touched on gender and sex issues, which ought to be a really big topic in any kind of social awareness in science fiction.
Absolutely.
So does anybody have anything to say about that before we have to wrap up here? Yeah, 2 minutes, quick. Explain all of sex and gender.
I mean, I do think that it's something that I'm trying to explore very carefully. My early attempts that will never be published were terrible. But it's one of the other one that we didn't really bring up much was disability. And these are things where Next Generation did a very interesting job with that with Geordie. But with all of these are things that can be made, like with gender, with orientation and stuff like that. That's all political, and so all of those problems are still exist hypothetically in any society, and prejudices can come back up. In terms of gender identity within the bimodal distribution, I guess you could say. That is something that, advances in technology can make a lot easier, as with disability, but it's sometimes difficult to figure out how to write about it without erasing the topic.
Yeah, so in some science fiction, like the culture, it's a non-existent issue because you're so fluid. You can change your sex anytime you feel like it. It's not even uncomfortable to do that. People do it routinely. People even change their species periodically. Yeah, that kind of fluidity is something I don't know how we would handle it, but it's there in science fiction. So yeah, they're getting us ready.
There's an episode of the Next Gen, I'm sure Steve is really familiar with it, that at the time I looked at it from a perspective of sexuality, like homosexuality versus heterosexuality. But nowadays, you talk about how things look differently years later. I see it more as a gender identity thing. There's a species that they encounter that only has one gender. And this character has a thing for Riker. Riker has a thing for the character, and the character comes to the realization that she identifies as her, and in her society that's not allowed, and she's ostracized and basically threatened basically with death. For going with her gender identity. At the time, I didn't recognize it for that being what it really is, but now I see it, and that was a great one.
Okay, as I said, we've reached the hour mark, and we should stop consuming everybody's time. But one thing before we go is we got a bunch of comments in the chat where people are asking about all that stuff behind everyone. Not Steve's. We know he's just got his shrine to Riker. That needs no further explanation. But people were asking about Joe's collection of books behind him, and Tammy, I see, has some things. Do you ever go to people's houses and prowl their bookshelves to see what they're reading? And I can say Steve may have Riker, but I've got a pink octopus in a top hat behind me. So
You win.
I win. Yeah. So what do people got back there?
Well, I've got this bookcase here is role-playing games. These are TSR role-playing games, so it's mostly D&D. There's Gamma World and Star Frontiers and all the other TSR games. The next one over is mostly Avalon Hill games, and then I've actually got a couple of bookcases to the left with a whole bunch of other games. And then I've got more games, but I need more bookcases. I have more games than I have bookcases, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so a bunch of people were guessing that looked like a gaming shelf back there, and I think they got it right. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Steve, you've got Riker and you've got something from YouTube.
This my only actual tangible accomplishment in my life. Yeah, my 100,000 subscribers plaque. Yeah,
And a little shrine to your drinking problem back there.
I have you can see way back there is all of my little Star Trek dolls. I call them dolls.
Oh.
They're not action figures. They're dolls. I'm comfortable enough to call them that.
Yeah, they look like bottles from here.
No,
okay.
Yeah, well, they are. You twist off Worf's head and take a pull, and it'll knock you down.
Okay, Tammy, what have you got hiding behind you? Is this your work office?
This is not my office. This is my partner's office. Yeah. So when the world shut down, he took my camera and my microphone because he needed to teach online. So I'm camping out in his office because he's got my radio show mic. So. But yeah, there's a typewriter back there and lots of DVDs, CDs. Files he's probably looked at 10 years ago or more. So nothing interesting.
Yeah, this used to be my daughter's bedroom, and when she moved out, I took over and have turned it into my office, which has been really useful through the pandemic because I'm not even allowed in my office. I'm in quarantine right now, so I don't get to go over there. And unfortunately, though, it's gotten very cluttered. That's mainly what I got here. People were asking about my pink book, I think. That's cell biology. That's serious stuff. So don't dismiss it because it's pink. Pink is a nice bright color too.
Pink used to be the male color way back when.
That's right. Yes. So I'm being very macho right there. And yes, I also have some Play-Doh back there. I also have a collection of various plushies.
Cool.
And puppets.
A man after my own heart.
Yes, when my granddaughter calls, we have to entertain her, and so she's probably irritated because she can't see Snowy Owl right now. So,
owls are cool.
Yeah. Yes, my granddaughter's very much into owls. Don't know why, just obsessed with owls. And then Abe, you're just sitting in the void, so you've got nothing to talk about. Is that right?
Well, I'm thinking of starting a religion based on the void, so that'll be fun. The whisper from between the stars.
Uh-huh.
As I do have things behind me, but it's the cabinet where we keep our dishes. I have a sort of I work in the living room,
Uh,
and I do have one plushie, and it's a malaria parasite because I had malaria once upon a time, and so I figured I'd get that from the giant microbes thing to
yeah.
memorialize that interesting experience.
Yes, I've got an HIV plushie around here somewhere, but
Oh, wow.
it's tucked away somewhere because that's not what I bring out for my granddaughter very often. Just hasn't come up.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually my basement. I'm sitting at Tablesaurus, which is a gaming table a friend of mine built for me several years ago. It's sturdy. I mean, I could lay down on this table, and actually I have, and it doesn't even creak. And I'm a rather large man, so that's an accomplishment.
Uh-huh. But very nice. Yeah, I don't play games anymore. Not because I don't want to, but just limitations on time and people and yeah.
Actually, COVID
Okay.
for that. Actually, I've actually had more gaming time the last 6 months than I have the previous 6 years.
Oh. No, it turns out that when you switch to online teaching from in-person teaching, it isn't easier. Suddenly you've got more work. And it basically doubled my workload trying to convert everything over. And I had to learn new things. Yeah.
I have my whole company working from home right now.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, because I guess the last day we were in the office was March 13th, and then I said no, I don't want anyone there. I don't like employees to get sick, so we're home.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, I should let you all go, and let me just close and mention that there's a few more things coming up tonight. So let's see, is it 2 hours from now? An hour from now. Oh, yeah, and an hour from now is the quiz. So I presume people have heard of QI. Yeah, so Abby St. Brendan is she's hilarious, and she's hosting a QI style game show. That's going to happen.
Station? How do you get that?
That will happen on my channel. So,
cool.
Yeah, and if you go to freethoughtblogs.com/fundraising, there's the schedule and there's a list there. So look for the quiz. And then after that tonight, at a later hour, we're having something called the Sophisticated Literature Reading. We are not naming the literature yet, so you'll just have to show up and be surprised and horrified. So we got a few people who are going to be doing some interesting readings from that. So that's all that fills up tonight, and then we go to sleep, right? I hope. Yeah, and then tomorrow we've got a panel on scientism with Rebecca Watson. So we're gonna get into this. It's the closest thing to a religion science has, and I hate it. So, atheist. And so we're gonna be talking about that and some of the issues there. And we got a few other things to wrap it up, and then we go home and we count our money, right?
Count the money.
Okay. Well, does anybody have anything else to say before I shut you down and send you on your way?
I just want to tell everybody watching, donate to support Free Thought Blogs, because the thoughts might be free, but that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, free speech isn't free.
Money.
Turns out to be really expensive to defend your free speech. So this is just too true. And also, we've mentioned a few of the people from Free Thought Blogs who are here. So Tammy and Abe, they have blogs, and I've linked them in the chat. You should go take a look at what they're doing and encourage them.
Can I say I'm going to I have all the books. I'm going to make a long post about these things and with some of the things that everybody touched on and how it specifically relates. So look for that, if not Sunday, then sometime soon.
Yes. And blogs are kind of old fashioned, but they are perfect for that kind of thing where you can go into depth and cover a lot of points and include links and help people find other information on the subject. So that's what we're good at. Maybe not so much good at YouTube videos. We'll leave those to Steve, right?
No, no pressure.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely no pressure.
No
Yeah.
pressure. You do it. You do it.
Yeah, I get to work on that. Yeah, go make a video on the subject of this panel.
Okay, I'll get right to work on that.
Okay, so thanks everybody, and thanks everybody in the chat. And we will talk to you all later. Remember, there's more stuff coming up tonight.
Having us on, and everyone donate.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I'm supposed to say. Give me money. No,
Donate.
give me money.
Well, I'll be a big angry black man coming to get you.
Everybody take care of yourselves. It's getting scary out there.
Yeah.
Real.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll talk to y'all later. Good night, everyone, and thanks for showing up. And the stream has ended.